Thank you for listening to the Business and Beyond podcast.
We appreciate all of our listeners. If this is your first time listening to the Business and Beyond podcast, we hope you enjoy this episode. This episode of the Business and Beyond podcast is brought to you by Sense in the City. We got Tony here. We both have our drinks. I have Woodford Reserve. What are you drinking?
You poured it out.
Well, I have Crown, but you poured something else in there.
Whatever this is, this flavored mineral water.
Well, you gotta let people know if you're watching on YouTube and can see the video or the video feed. Yeah. Well, I guess we have to say we're not advertising.
No,
for
we're not
them.
advertising for them. So
Well, but we are advertising. But we'll just jump into it. Last episode, we were talking about a poll.
Yeah.
On the Dave Ramsey show, they were talking about
The
whatever
great
40
resignation.
the Great
Yeah.
Resignation. 25 to 40% of employees would consider
making a business move.
and we I don't want to say we criticized it, but we questioned the wording.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's how a lot of polls are done. If you want to get a specific result,
Yeah, the perspective.
you are going to word it a certain way. So that's why I found another poll on LinkedIn, and I was thinking the same thing. Although they put an option here for that, but
Yeah.
should managers be held accountable for high employee turnover? Easy option that pops in your head. Yeah, of course the manager.
Which ties in directly from last week of the turnover, the 25
Yeah.
to 40% turnover you're about to
Yes,
see.
exactly. And when you first read that, your initial thought is you jump to the last manager that pissed you off and you left, or maybe your current job. You're like, yeah, that's what you're thinking. It's the boss's fault that I want to leave. But then you think about it. Well, why is there high employee turnover? And it's a very vague question. And the options are yes, no, and it depends. And they want you to comment if you put it depends, which is very intentional. They want you to put it depends. They ask a vague question. They want you to comment and help the algorithms, whatever.
Yeah.
So, but should manager be held accountable for high employee turnover? Well, depending on, the last job I worked at, the manager had nothing to do with me
So
leaving.
right away your answer is it depends.
It depends.
Because you started your sentence with
It
depending
depends.
on.
Depending on the situation. Why are you leaving? In your last situation, technically, the last company you worked at, technically, it was a yes, because he should be held accountable for it, because he was really why the company went out of business, more or less.
We'll circle back to that when you're done making your point. I have a different
So
perspective I
vaguely,
wanna talk about.
you think, well, high employee turnover, they're not happy. Yeah, it's the manager's fault. Well, is it the manager's job to pay you a certain amount? In some companies it's not. It may be higher up depending on what job you do. You may have a set amount that this is what you get paid. Everybody gets paid. Everybody at your position is going to get raises. It's not.
It's capped.
It's not performance based.
Based on your position.
So is it the manager's job to keep you happy where you don't quit? Well, we'll go back to you because I have another side to this that I want to talk about though.
So my situation, and I've come to grips, I had an option previous to the company going out of business anyways. It wasn't like a surprise thing. It was something a lot of people knew was coming. So I don't blame or feel like the responsibility was on. For me, I feel like that was my responsibility that, that was a little different situation than just the turnover of leaving. So I guess it's hard to compare that one. But we were raised and we came from the cloth of our family was in, in the restaurant industry. And kind of all of them believed and kind of what passed down to us and was taught is there are no bad employees, only bad managers. And to an extent, I still to this day look at it that way. We have to adapt to what the cultures are, whether it's millennials or whatever the next generation coming in.
There's
Gen
hard
Xers,
workers and lazy workers, but a good
how
manager,
you manage them, you put them in a
can get the best out of
are
them.
you putting someone in a position to succeed, or are you challenging them to a point where they're set up to fail?
Yeah.
But to answer that question of the poll, it does depend. But I don't know if you can put all of the blame on the supervisor, especially in today's times, like we talked about last week with that poll. People are just looking for different things. I mean, COVID threw everyone for a loop, right? Mm-hmm. You work from home and then you enjoy that home time. Well, it's not the company's fault that you enjoy being at home more and maybe they can't continue to offer. I mean, some businesses, they adapted and did what they had to let people work from home, but not every business is set up to work from home like that. I mean, they've done the best they could through that time, but they're not necessarily set up to do that all the time. And Apple's looking at bringing their employees back at least part of the time this fall. So
yeah, you can oversimplify it and say, well, if my company does this, I'll stay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not whether they'll do it or not. If they can't do it, or
exactly
if they're not set up to do it, then I mean, yeah, you can break it down and say, you would have stayed. It's not my fault I'm leaving. I was going to stay if they could do this, but they just couldn't match that salary.
Yeah.
And you can only do so much. And the other side of this is, what does it mean to be accountable? Well, they say, should they hold them accountable? Is it meaning blame the managers? Because that's kind of the point we're making at first.
Yeah.
Like, should you blame the managers? That's the first thing we thought. Or is it holding them accountable by not blaming them, but in a performance review, should they be held accountable for high employee turnover? If you own a company and things are going bad, you're losing money, whether it's directly your fault or not, you're still responsible for it. You want to say they hold you accountable using air quotes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, yes, to this very vague question, I'm not going to blame somebody for saying yes, because really managers should technically be held accountable for everything that happens under them. Now, that doesn't mean they should be fired or disciplined or necessarily, but they need to answer for it. Well, why is this happening?
Yeah.
If this is happening under your management, this is happening under you.
Yeah.
And it's not the manager's boss to figure out why tell me why this is happening. You hold them accountable for it.
Yeah. To go back, though, to the point I was making, with especially in these times, based on the stats that we've looked at, it's, in my opinion, it's hard to blame them or hard to hold them accountable in these situations when the economy is the way it is, the job market is the way it is. It's an employee-run market right now. Just before the show, we were listening to a little clip from a TED Talk, and that's what they were saying is that, previous to this, you did have the employer ran it.
Yeah.
But now it's in employee run. So they kind of dictate what the job market looks like.
And that particular TED Talk, the main point they were making was the difference in generations, with baby boomers and Gen X and millennials. That's on the manager too, to some extent. I mean, you can break it down. So these are the job requirements. I'm doing my job, but connecting with everybody and figuring, and it's holding yourself accountable. If you're a lazy employee, that's on you. You can blame that person. Well, you need to work harder, but you can also bring it out on the manager if they hire them, if they keep them on, if they want to inspire them. I mean, some people, I get it. You can't. Every employee-manager relationship isn't always a fit, but it's either you make them better, or you can get rid of them.
Yeah, we dealt with that in the past. And at my previous company, there was a lot of, we were having to hire younger guys. Those millennials, they were kind of the ones coming in, and there was a lot of talk.
You say sneeringly, those millennials.
Well, I mean, that was the workforce that was coming in. I mean, it was a construction, labor. Those were the laborers at the time.
Yeah.
And the older guys mostly had moved on to managerial positions, and there was a talk, and just, I mean, the bringing we came up with, right? I was one of the ones that's saying, look, we got to figure out how to work around these guys. It doesn't matter, maybe they're, everyone else was saying, oh, they're lazy and they're this and they're that. They don't want to come to work. They want you to do everything for you. Well, I mean, okay.
Work with them.
If that exactly,
Get
that was
rid
my
of them
point.
or work with
That
them.
was
I mean,
my
not
point.
that the people
No.
saying they're lazy.
But that was my
to-
point. Was we needed to
It's
figure
a
out how to
manager.
work with. That's the next generation of workers. How do we adapt to that? We adapt or we die. You know.
Yeah.
And
you can go off on a bigger tangent
Yeah.
about what's important, and we talked about that too, the millennial stigma in one episode,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure we talked about what's important to certain generations, making a difference.
Yeah.
Although I don't know that that's a generational thing more than an age thing.
Yeah. Because I
where-
think we look back at and that was something at the same age period, the late
previous
20s, early
generations,
30s.
yes.
Every generation had a point where they wanted to make a difference.
Yeah, and that's what I think. Same with like politicians. I thought I don't believe one of them was corrupt when they first got in. They wanted to make a difference, and if they're a famous politician, it's because they played ball. They're already corrupt.
Yeah.
But and at some point, there are the employees that stay happy, or they know how to get the most out of their job, or maybe there's high turnover and they leave. But then there's other ones that just fall into it day to day. I don't have to like my job. I just have to have a job. I'm doing
Yeah.
the right thing, earning my paycheck, making a living. And what's important to them is different. They don't question the status quo. They just do what they're told or what they're supposed to do. And then when a young guy comes in and asks, "Well, why is it this way?"
Why are
and you
we
say,
doing
"Yeah,
this?"
don't worry about it, kid. You're asking too many questions." And then they get the stigma that they're being lazy because they don't want to do it this way. They want to look for the easy way out.
Yeah.
When I'm not going to say that's not true. A lot of people are like that, but especially when you get into people being laborers, a lot of them, if
They want to have they want a reasoning of why we're doing
Yes.
this. What an explanation of why are we doing. They want to have the entire outlook, not just do this. They don't. Most of the time, it's not an issue of doing this. Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Okay, now understand why
You
we're
need to
what
have a
we're trying to
meaning.
do.
They can get more
Okay,
involved in
now
it
we
and behind
understand
it
what
better.
we're doing exactly.
Yeah, and I'm going to point this out. I'll read this. The statistics on this. So, should managers be held accountable for high employee turnover? 74% said yes. You have 20% saying, or 22% saying it depends. That 4% that said no. Like, I get it depends. I get yes, but you read that and you're like, no, they shouldn't be held accountable. I'm thinking that 4% are probably managers.
Yeah.
Let's say out of 2,200 votes, just quick math.
2,200
Yeah.
people
How many ever 4% of that 2,200? Yeah, those got to be the managers, right?
And what was the stat? What was it? 22%.
It depends.
It depends. Is
Yeah, it
lowest
didn't say
22?
point. Yeah, 22% say it depends. 74% yes, but 4% say no.
So, yeah, I mean, you probably would guess 74% of those are the employees that were
That
disgruntled.
probably
of
quit.
a-
Yeah. Probably quit or thinking about quitting. That's the 40%
Uh-huh.
who voted saying they would be
Yeah.
willing to leave a job. 22% saying it depends. A mix between managers and then empathetic employees who
or
understand.
people just have an open mind and understand
Mhm.
certain situations. I mean, not that, just like there can be bad employees and there's only so much you can do for some employees. There are some bad managers that are just on a power trip, and I think that's less than not. I mean, there's very few times that I've ever come across someone, if you give them the opportunity
Yeah.
to do right.
I mean, there's people who are bad at their job
Yeah.
in every position. And I usually, for the most part, give managers, or in my history, managers or people above me the benefit of the doubt. For the most part, not just give them a complete pass, but
And I do.
I
the
know
same
they're dealing
for-
with stuff that I have no clue what's happening. They're in that position. You don't have to respect the person, respect the position.
Yeah.
And you may look at something, well, they're being closed-minded, they're saying no, but they have somebody to answer to as well, unless they're, unless they own the company, but still they have a
But even then,
creditors to
they
answer
have,
to. They have
an agenda. They have a business plan a model that they're following, and this is how they've set it up. And that's where I tend to think that it's hard to put a lot of blame on a manager, because if you have a certain plan, then that's what you're going to stick to. You're going to stick to your guns. This is your business plan. This is how you're going to operate things. If somebody's just not cut out or fit for it, then it's time for them to move on.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's low turnover or high turnover, if they're not a fit for you, they're not a fit for you.
And being held accountable, when you're changing the word from blame to accountable, you can really break it down to, yeah, they should be held accountable. Because if you're doing everything, you have the right reasoning for running your business or running your branch or location. And yes, this, you agree this would be better if we did things this way or change this, but
Yep.
it just can't happen and they want to quit their job. Overall, yeah, the manager can be held accountable. You can look at, okay, that's a problem. If high turnover, I guess high turnover in most situations isn't a problem to the company. I mean, there are giant conglomerate trucking companies where that's all that they don't care about turnover.
Mm-hmm.
They're just piping in new students. And I mean, we think of it as a problem because there's inexperienced truckers, and the one I'm in particular thinking about is self-insured because they have so many accidents, but they can afford it because they're
Yeah.
paying drivers too little because they have new drivers.
Mm-hmm.
But to them, it's not necessarily a problem, I guess. So I don't think they're looking at holding them accountable for that, or if that's an issue. But if you're looking at, okay, we're holding you accountable for this because it's become a problem.
Yeah.
There's a way to fix that problem. Now you can weigh the pros and the cons. They're leaving because we're doing things this way. But if we don't do things this way, we have bigger problems than employees leaving.
Yeah.
So that's why I say I don't blame people for saying yes to this very vague question.
That's the problem, is it is vague, and I think
What does accountable mean?
I'm really surprised the numbers aren't higher, the stats aren't higher on it depends. Because every situation, it does depend.
And that's why you see yes, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to answer yes.
Yes. But
No,
you have
obviously
to
I'm answering yes, and then it depends. Like, oh yeah, I got to answer.
You got to think about that.
Because the reason
There's too many situations, too many variables to that.
And breaking down the last couple of jobs I left. The last job I left, obviously, the branch manager, the sales manager, it had nothing to do with it. It was I guess COVID indirectly. We talked about it. COVID indirectly caused the economy. I'm like, it just makes more sense to do this. Managers, I couldn't. What were they going to do?
Yeah.
And the last trucking job I left to work for the lumber yard, they just weren't keeping me busy. And I don't necessarily blame the manager. I mean, you have and this is the same conglomerate company that I was talking about. That's who I worked for before I went to the lumber company. Yeah. And dispatch, the driving manager, there's nothing I guess they could have done, really. I think maybe you can break it down to whoever was in charge of hiring. I think they hired incredibly too many people for a job just to make sure it was all covered. And that's what you get when you have a driving job that gets paid by the load and by the mile. I don't care if you sit for 2 hours, as long as we have this load covered.
Yeah.
I don't have to pay you anymore. And that's what it breaks down to. What situation is it? I can only remember off the top of my head one time I left a job because of the manager. And it was a personality thing. It really wouldn't have been that big a deal. It's just something I couldn't do anymore.
Yeah, I've never left anywhere because of a manager. I mean, it was always for better opportunities, or my last employer just closing the doors. But,
well, yeah, I've never just had one of those quitting stories.
Like I said, in that
"F this,"
situation,
and walked out.
Even though it was management's issue that put the company out of business, I still don't blame them to this day.
Yeah,
they made decisions that they thought were best during a pandemic, and it was just one of those situations that. Mm-hmm. You pick your poison, right? You go this way or you go this way. We don't know which one's the right, and maybe neither one were in that situation. So you can't put the blame solely on management.
No, and half these people that say yes, again, I'm not blaming you for saying yes, depending on what your thinking is or what.
Well, and you could use that. You could use that as an excuse if you're leaving a company. Yeah, this is guy. Just say you're not happy. You're not a good. Like most of the time, it's just about not being a good fit.
Exactly, and you're looking at okay, I'm leaving this company for this reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a manager should be held accountable because they could have fixed that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they just paid me more, or
Yeah.
not been a douche, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's, of course, you can go to be personality of managers. It's just personalities of when people blame athletes for being too crazy and getting fights and things like that. It's like, well, that's kind of the personality to be on that level of competitiveness your whole life to get to there. Like some people just aren't managers, and as managers, they're say you can't just be getting walked all over, but there are managers that are like that. But you have to have a certain personality to be able to manage people.
Mm-hmm. No, it's more
and kind of a
it's more
douchey,
of a born trait than it is a taught trait. Not
like
everyone
you don't
can
really
be taught
care
to be
what
a
people.
supervisor.
Yeah, you don't really care what people think. You don't let it bother you as much, and it can come off pretty douchey. And like I said, in my situation, for that, I didn't just leave the job. I didn't have my quitting moment where I said, "F y'all, I'm out of here." I know a lot of people have that, and I'm not going to look down upon those people. I'm just in a situation like I found a better opportunity because of management. I was like, okay, can't work anymore, so I'm going to go find a job and then quit.
Yeah.
Which isn't for everyone. I couldn't personally do that. Like I couldn't just say screw this and like, well, crap, what am I going to do for a job now?
Yeah.
But I guess if you're in that situation, maybe situations like that, it would be the manager's fault to drive you to that position.
Yeah, maybe if they told you, this was the circumstance, this was the hours, this was the pay, this was, whatever the circumstances were, and they didn't follow through with those, then yeah, that would be a situation. It would be management. If you were supposed to have certain hours, maybe you were supposed to have a certain amount of overtime and they weren't giving it to you, or you were supposed to have 6-hour days, 8-hour days, not 12 to 15-hour days. Those are all scenarios that maybe it is the management's fault when you were promised one thing and they're not following through with it.
Yeah, if I was working a job and I just said screw it, I'm out, and I quit right there, it would probably have to be the manager's fault for me to do that. It'd be a situation. I can't even think of a situation where I wouldn't. Okay, I'm going to find another job first, secure that, then go put my notice in. It would have. Whatever it would be, it'd have to be something. Because even with another employee, it's like, okay, if you're just a coworker, I could care less what you think. Yeah, sure, I want to get along, just, for peace of mind. But if you're going to be a dick, okay, I don't have to deal with you. But whatever situation drives you to quit like that, I would say I'm more of a calm person than most people. I don't let things bother me, and if they do, I try to let it pass before I make any kind of serious decision on that. But
yeah, I'm a little more edgy than that, but I've still never been in a situation where I would just...
Yeah, of course I've been in situations where I was just like, F this, I want to quit. Or
Yeah,
I'll tell my coworkers,
Yeah.
that dude's an idiot, he didn't know what the hell he's talking about. But,
Yeah.
I've never made that decision. And of course, didn't
Well,
tell the manager what I thought.
Cooler heads prevail. So, it's always
Yeah, I'm not
better.
saying, if my wife listens to this, she's like, no, you are not that calm. But I can freak out about things, but I still have the mindset of knowing where I'm at, what situation I'm at, how to act.
How much more can I endure before?
Yeah,
That's
just like hold yourself till you get in your car on the way home, and then you call your spouse or whoever and vent to them and talk, and then cuss and complain then.
Yeah.
So I'd like to definitely hear from, because this is one of those edgy, juicy subjects. Would love to hear from some of our listeners. If you've ever quit, go ahead and answer this question too.
Yeah.
Comment and answer the question: should managers be held accountable for high employee turnover? And tell us why. And tell us a situation. Have you been in a situation? If you say yes,
Yeah.
no,
Yes, no, or
indifferent.
indifferent. What's the reasoning behind your answer? Let's run our own statistics and see, based on our followers, what this is. Let's see how close this poll runs.
And give us some good, juicy stories to talk about. We can definitely give you a shout out in our next episode. We can, we can just do a Q&A episode. What's your worst or best, I guess, quitting stories?
Yeah.
Or what's the worst way you've left a job?
Yep. All right.
There's got to be some. I mean, if you're listening to this, more than likely you're an entrepreneur, business owner, and if you ever listen to Gary Vee, you know entrepreneurs are built differently.
Yeah.
That when you go through school, they fail entrepreneurs. They're not for entrepreneurs; they're for workers.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, people, especially I want to say not closed-minded at all. Entrepreneurs by default are open-minded, but strong-minded, strong-willed, and thinking and really caring about what they do, thinking this isn't how it should be done. I bet you can get a lot of in-your-face stories about not just quitting and leaving because they didn't like their boss or thought their boss was doing something wrong, but something where they had a big explosion and walked out. And, you know, those are the uncomfortable stories, but those are fun to hear.
They do have a different mindset towards that, and they kind of understand different levels of management. Entrepreneurs do, and they understand, you know, where ownership comes from and that mindset. So sometimes they do become much more frustrated when things aren't going right.
Yeah, and I would bet to say that a poll of our listeners would show it depends higher than any other thing. I mean, it feels like more of a bias thing. If you ask a political question to members of the NRA, it's going to be very skewed one way unless you just ask random people. And I think listening or asking this question to our listeners, I think it depends would be a lot higher than yes.
Yeah.
In this situation.
Yeah, I think especially because you said earlier that we have a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs that follow us. They have a different mindset and different perspective than what I would assume this poll had. I think this poll probably had more laborer type, you know, workers than you did entrepreneurs or any type of managers.
You would think, but this poll was off LinkedIn.
Well, that's
so
true. And LinkedIn, I would say is more of a
the uppity,
upper level management.
From what I see, users on it, we're talking for the most part. Maybe it's just driving people towards who they think I'll know, but a lot of salespeople.
Yeah.
You do see like people that say stay-at-home mom. I'm like, why do you have a LinkedIn if you have a stay? I mean, maybe you have aspirations. You just want something,
of some sort.
Realtors, things like that. But people who are really about building their brands.
LinkedIn is great for documenting. It's almost like an active resume.
Yeah,
of sorts.
Exactly.
You pretty much it mirrors your resume, and you kind of keep that live and moving daily.
And when I was recruited for my last job, I went to LinkedIn to update my resume because it keeps it for you. And obviously, we all have different, don't we all, wink, wink, have different resumes for different positions or different, maybe not different information, but skewed information. So I was
different experiences.
Yeah, I was recruited off LinkedIn, so I was like, well, I have to make sure that the resume matches the LinkedIn profile too.
I pretty much mirror mine with everything. Anyways,
I do too. I mean, it's hard these days to. I mean, depending on what job, if you get to a certain level, you can't really lie about it.
No.
Because if you're getting a background check done, it's
social media.
They're
worked for an
know.
employer that was one of the first things they did. They would go search you out on all social medias and see what type of see what information they could find.
Yeah, and when you have the people say, hey, I'm going to say I worked for this company and put you down as the manager, and it's almost like, you can put them as a reference, but they don't even call those people anymore. They just search them out because I was, I would get emails from this background check company and say, hey, we couldn't find anybody from this company. Who should we contact over there to try to figure out? I'm like, oh, so the contacts I gave you, I didn't lie about them, but the context I gave you didn't matter. Yeah. So everything's so open with information, and it's I know when I go to scout a different company, not to go work for, but to try to do business with, it's the first place I go is LinkedIn. Like obviously I Google them, get the information. I'll go to LinkedIn and figure out who works for them.
Trying to make connections with
Yeah, you
some of the
follow them, make
employees there.
connections ahead of time, and then you know it tells you, for the most part, if they have all the information, it tells you who the bosses are, who the sales reps are, whoever are, what
So
position
you know
they have.
who you need to speak with.
It's easier than just Googling it and then calling and say, hey,
Yeah. Who do I
don't
need
know-
to talk to
Yeah.
in this department? Yeah. Yeah, you can start making those connections on social media.
Yeah, and it works. So with all that, it makes it difficult, but at the same time, you know, I'm gonna call a bad on myself for not being prepared. What I should have done is start reading some of these comments and see what some of these it depends or even no. Figure out why do you just flat out say no? In no situation they should be held accountable. It's
And you go to their LinkedIn and they're
a managers of this and that. The management's always right is a group they're on or something like that. The employee's always wrong. Things like that. But it's definitely a poll I'd like to, even though I already know what our listeners would say, but I would definitely hear comments at different perspectives. I mean, we gave a couple of different, we obviously each only have one perspective, but we tried to be open-minded and figure out what situations dictates answering this question. But maybe there's a listener out there that would say no, and they have a completely different
I'd be interested.
situation than, oh yeah, I'm a manager.
I'd be
so
interested
no.
to have that conversation with someone to see what their perspective was on. Thank you again for supporting the Business and Beyond podcast.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button to be alerted every time we post a new episode.